Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hope Without Sight with your host, Sailor Cooper and
Tyler Evans.
Yes, this is episode 14. 14, the second episode of today. Actually, I'm here at the podcast content creation camp in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. I know Tyler, he's not here, but maybe next time you can come, right? If you want. Well, on today's episode,
we'll see.
We have a very special guest. She is a very special lady who has been dealing with challenges related to mental illness since 1998. But despite this, she is still standing strong today. Please welcome Michelle Leidinger. Michelle, it's good to have you on Hope Without Sight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you bet. So, in your bio, I read shortly, a month before graduating college, you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And, I won't get into the specifics, but I have seen, from my perspective, what that's like. It's not easy to manage, but by all means, it's not impossible, which is why you're here to share your success stories, because that's what Hope Without Sight is about. Sharing stories of overcoming life's challenges and adversity and coming on top. So, yeah, you take it away. Tell us what you got.
Okay, so yeah, I was diagnosed 1 month before graduation from college back in 1998, and at the time, I had been dealing with pretty severe mood swings for about 2 years. I thought that it was a moral failing on my part. I kind of suspected, especially the last year, that there was something wrong, but I kept feeling like I was making excuses for myself. And so I bought a whole bunch of self-help books. I was trying to discipline myself. I was trying to, and I, with mental illness, you can't try your way out of it. You can't read self-help books and fix it yourself. There's an actual problem that's going on that you have no control over. And it was actually my parents and my aunt and uncle who lived near me. My parents were in another state, so my aunt and uncle who lived near me were the ones that really saw the mood cycles and could see that there was something severely wrong. And they finally convinced me to go see a doctor. And when I went to the doctor, I remember having really mixed feelings about the diagnosis, because on the one hand, I was relieved because there was an explanation for what was going on that was not my fault. But on the other end, I felt like he was telling me I was broken. And I honestly believed that nobody was going to want me like that. I felt like when I walked out of there, I thought, who's going to want me? I'm broken. Yeah. This means I'm broken. And my doctor told me at that initial visit, he's like, don't worry, you just find the right medications and you'll be fine. And so I believed him, and I tried diligently for the next 10 years to take medications, because I thought that's going to save me. I'm going to find the right medication combination and I'll get better. And it was pretty awful for 10 years because I didn't tolerate medication very well. I took everything the doctors prescribed to me, but I had horrible side effects with almost every medication that I took. Side effects that were almost worse than the disorder itself, sometimes were worse than the disorder itself. And I just kept getting progressively worse. And 10 years after my initial diagnosis, I was hospitalized 3 different times in 2 different states. I had 2 little children at the time. I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my husband, was trying to go to graduate school, and it was like the worst possible scenario for me to have a breakdown, but you don't get to control when that happens. And they did, in one of my hospitalizations, they did electroconvulsive therapy on me. It was they call it a full course. So I had 3 times a week for 4 weeks. And during that time, I had my first psychotic episode, which changed my diagnosis from bipolar 1 to bipolar 2 to bipolar 1. And it was awful. That whole year was terrible. I was having severe mood swings, like going from one day thinking, and I was planning on getting tattoos is actually something that I think is pretty common for people with bipolar disorder, because when you're manic, that's something for whatever reason, it's very attractive. And so I kept like trying to go get tattoos, and I kept getting stopped by people, and there are a lot of symptoms. There are a lot of things that I went through during that time. And I don't know if you need to put a trigger warning on this episode, but I made 2 attempts during that year on my life. And I got to a point where I just felt like there was no hope anymore. I really honestly believed that my husband and my children would be better off if I were gone. It wasn't the suicidal thing that came on suddenly. It was something that came on really gradually. It started with nightmares about dying. And I would have really bad, vivid nightmares about dying and wake up in the morning feeling terrible inside. And it progressed to daydreams. I would be driving down the road and my mind would be like coming up with scenarios for how I could die, and at first I was like horrified by it. And then gradually I started thinking, that wouldn't be so bad. And just gradually, and my mind kept lying to me, telling me, your husband will be better off if he had a different wife, or your children may be better off if you're ruining their life. And the turning point for me was after my third hospitalization. This was after the second attempt in my third hospitalization. I was watching my children. I have a very clear memory of this day. I was watching my children play, and I had a very clear thought come into my head. If you succeed in taking your life, you will ruin your daughter's life. Not my children, not my husband, my daughter. I knew specifically that it would ruin her life. And I remember being shocked by that thought, because I really believed that they'd be better off. Like, it wasn't like I would be better off. I believed they would be better off because they mattered to me more than anything. My children were the most important thing to me in my life, and I wanted what was best for them. And I remember as soon as I had that thought, I knew it was true, because she was such a loving, caring little girl. And I knew that she would blame herself and that would ruin her life. And so from that point on, I was determined to survive. I thought, if the only thing I can do is survive my life, I will do that for my daughter. Sorry, I'm getting emotional thinking about it.
I mean, of course, obviously for you, but mainly for your daughter, because if you were taking your life, she couldn't have handled it.
Yeah, it would have ruined her life. And at the time, that gave me the hope that I needed to keep trying. Like, I didn't believe I had any value anymore. When somebody gets to that point, you feel so horrible about yourself that you don't believe that your life has value. You don't believe you have value, and you don't believe your life has value. And so it wasn't worth trying for me. But in my mind, I'm not saying that it wasn't, but in my mind, I wasn't worth trying for. But my daughter was. And the moment that I realized that it was going to hurt her if I ended my life, then I was determined that I was going to try for her. And the thing that changed for me at that point was that I decided that I was never going to let suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts stay unchecked. I was going to ask somebody for help if I had those thoughts, because I hadn't done that before. I hadn't told people because I was embarrassed by the thoughts. I was afraid of getting hospitalized. I didn't want people to know that I was having those thoughts. And so I didn't tell people. And that's like having an intruder in your home that's trying to hurt you and not doing anything about it. And so from that point on, that was my commitment, is if I ever had a thought like that, I would ask for help. And then about, 2 years after that. So this was 2008. And in 2010 was when my doctor and I found the micronutrient treatment that he switched me to that started changing things for me. It gave my brain what it needed to be balanced. And then my brain started to heal. And then the following decade, I just started learning each of the different tools that I needed to use in my life, the different changes I needed to make and the tools that I needed to use that would help me to learn how to live a healthy life. So it was a gradual process. And that's why I started sharing what I learned, because I thought, none of the things that I do are unique. It's not like anything special. I just didn't know to do them. It took me a decade of researching and studying and learning to figure it out for myself. And so that's why I started my blog 2 years ago, was because I thought it shouldn't be a mystery. This shouldn't be something hidden that people have to figure out for themselves. I want to tell people what I am doing so that they can do it for themselves. So that's how I started my blog. And that's why I started reaching out to people and trying to help, because I wanted people, number one, to know that there's hope. You can live a healthy, balanced, productive life with bipolar.
even though
And this
the
is how you do it.
even though the illness can be so, so bad, because I'll just say, like, I don't have bipolar myself, but I've seen others with the disorder, and you know, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's overwhelming, uh,
Yeah.
not just to you, but to the immediate family as well. And you always have to know that, like, it's not you, it's the illness that's taking hold of your life, and you just have to work and not allow it to do
Yeah,
so.
and it's, I think, one of the hardest things in that situation. So that year, 2008, almost ended my marriage. It almost ended my marriage. My husband, if he had left, I wouldn't have blamed him. It
You
was
wouldn't
horrible.
have
Like,
you
I would
wouldn't have
not have
blamed
blamed
him.
my husband. No, I wouldn't have blamed him for leaving. I mean, he was the one who had to stop me both times when I was making attempts.
Eh,
And it kind of, like, he kind of shut down emotionally for several years. It took us a long time to get back to a place of closeness in our marriage. I'm grateful to him that he didn't leave, but I wouldn't have blamed him if he had.
And
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 I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
and uh not only that, did you imagine your children, as young as they were,
Yeah.
if they saw that, how could they process?
Well, and I had not made any attempt where they could have seen it. So they didn't know until they were teenagers about that. And I shared it with them just because I wanted them to know, since I was going to be talking about it in public, I needed to make sure that they knew, what had happened. But um, I think that's one of the hardest things with, people who are related or close to somebody with bipolar disorder, is that it's a very helpless feeling. You're watching somebody that that you love suffer, and you can't do, a lot of times can't do anything to help them. When you're in a
Yeah,
manic state, for example, mania, the person who has mania thinks they're rational,
absolutely.
and they're completely irrational, but they don't realize that they're irrational. And so, I remember having huge arguments with my husband about, one of my problems when I got manic was compulsive spending. Like, I would run
Oh
the credit
yes.
cards that really bad. In fact, during one of my hospitalizations, he didn't know that I had a credit card number memorized, and I was making online purchases in the hospital and having stuff shipped to our house. I mean,
Wow.
I don't know why I had access to the internet. I was in the hospital. They shouldn't have let me on on the computer,
Yeah.
but it was, it's, and I've been with people now that I'm balanced. I've been with people that are manic and seen, but I know better than to say, hey, I think you're manic, because that's like, it's very triggering for somebody who's not willing to listen. My husband and I actually had to come up with a way to communicate when he saw mood cycles starting, so that I wouldn't bite his head off, because I would
Yeah.
say, I want you to tell me, but then he would tell me and I'm like, no, I'm not, and he's like, I am not telling you again. That's a trap. Like, I don't trust you anymore. But I really wanted to live well. I wanted to be able to be a healthy partner for my husband and a healthy mother for my children. And I notice I say healthy and not good, because I don't like the term good or bad. I feel like those are not productive terms to label ourselves with. But healthy is a term that you can use. I wanted to be mentally healthy for my husband and my children. And so that was one of the things, like, one of the things that I did over the years was develop, I call it a mental health emergency response plan, or an ERP, that I developed, that has different pieces to it that help me learn how to manage my mood cycles more effectively, so that they don't have such an intense effect on my husband and my children. And it shortens the duration of the mood cycle, because I'm being proactive about managing it, rather than just kind of letting it take me for a ride, if that makes sense.
And so how do you know, like, when an episode is coming on, how do you know to stop it so that it won't get so out of hand?
Right. So what I started doing in that emergency response plan I was telling you about, I have something called an early warning system, and I started using a mood tracking app, and I use it very consistently. When I first started, I don't use it like 3 times a day anymore. I don't need to anymore. But when I first started using it, I was tracking my mood 3 times a day. And in the app that I use, there's a free version called Bearable, and the first thing that I started tracking was just my mood cycle and my energy level. And then I started, adding, once I got used to doing that, then I started adding things in like social factors, things to start identifying triggers. And what that did for me was help me to start recognizing what my symptoms were so that I could start to recognize when I was entering a mood cycle. And when you catch it early, then you start to, that helped me recognize, okay, I'm starting to get manic right now. I need to be careful because I'm going to have thoughts that aren't rational. And so I started trusting my husband more. And I would go to him and say, I'm thinking this. What do you think? Rather than trusting myself to make decisions during that period, I would talk to my husband and let him help kind of check me. But I had to choose to do that for myself. It was something
Yep.
because I didn't like
You
during
had
the
to choose it.
mania. Well, during the mania, you feel, a lot, some people feel, everybody feels a little bit different. For me, I just felt like I was so productive, and I had all these great ideas and stuff, and I would start huge projects. And I always started the project and I would get all ramped up and then I would crash. And the aftermath was disastrous. I would see, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've started this huge project. I've spent all this money. I would feel terrible. And then I would get severely depressed. Number one, because my brain chemistry was depressing. But number two, because I was feeling terrible for the stuff that I'd done during the manic episode. And so it was really important for me to start learning how to identify, like, I'm starting to get manic. And these are the things that I need to do during the manic episode to manage it so that I don't let myself get completely manic. Because I could, by not letting myself ramp up into that all the way, then I managed it so that I didn't get like peak where was out of control. The same was true for the depressive episodes. Like I have in the emergency response plan, I have something called auxiliary power. And auxiliary power is designed to identify what are the most important things that I need to do. And those are the things that get my emotional energy, and I let go of the rest of it. And that's especially important as a mother for me because I have children and my
Wow.
kids need me to take care of them. And so I have, my feeding my children, making sure they're safe, when they got to school, making sure that they got to school. But those were the things that mattered most. And if I didn't shower, if I didn't, if I didn't volunteer, if I had to let people know that I was, where I was volunteering, that I couldn't help out, I would just cancel everything else and make sure that the little bit of energy that I had went to the things that mattered most, and the rest of it I let go of until I've recovered.
You had to prioritize in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you have to do it before you're in that state, because if you wait until you're in that state, then you start feeling bad about all the stuff you're not doing. But if you identify, okay, when I'm getting depressed, I have limited emotional resources, and these are the things that I'm going to give those resources to, and the rest of it I let go of, And so it's really important to learn how to manage, the mania and manage the depression so that you don't, because if you don't manage them, then they can get out of control. And that's when you
absolutely.
get into, situations where you're doing damage to yourself and relationships.
Yes. And the question, have there been times where you've been unstable, like where you've like gotten upset and like gone off on your children, especially?
Yeah. Yeah, it was horrible. That was one of the worst parts of it. And I think that's probably the reason why I felt so strongly that my children would be better off with a different mother, was because I called it rage. Like I would have these almost out of body experiences where I was raging, and I felt like I was watching myself do it. I felt like I didn't have any control over what I was doing. And I would scream like out of control at my children. And then I would sob afterwards because I felt so bad about what I'd done,
Mm.
but I didn't feel like I had any control over what was happening. And that was one of the worst parts of it, because I love my children and I didn't want to hurt them, but I was
No,
like raging at them in a way that was scary to them. It was really frightening.
it wasn't intentional, of course. And I
No.
mean, if the fact that you will remember it after, is good. So you'll know next time, because I've always wondered, um, especially when people have a manic episode, um, when it's all over, do they remember it? Do they remember all of it after the fact, or just bits and
It
pieces of it?
it depends. It depends on the experience you're having. So there are times when people, when they're manic, they will dissociate. And when somebody dissociates, then they may not remember everything that happened. But I have only had one time, and it was actually, I don't think that it was actually dissociative. The doctor said it was. I think it was because of the electroconvulsive therapy that messed up my memory. Because I have whole chunks of time that I don't remember, but it was all during the time that I was having electroconvulsive therapy. And I actually think that was the reason I don't remember. But I've never had, outside of that time period when I was having the ACT, I haven't had dissociation. But I know that there are some people who have dissociation. And there is also times when people don't want to admit that they did it because they're so embarrassed about it and they don't want to talk about it. And so
Did
even if they are remembering, they don't want to talk about it because it's so humiliating to even acknowledge, let alone discuss.
Now, did ECT help you at all in the
Oh
long
no,
run? No,
no,
it
no.
so
And I know that there are some people that it did, but for me, it actually exacerbated my disorder. That I had a psychotic episode during the treatment. Like, so the treatments were Monday, Wednesday, Friday, first thing in the morning. And about 3 weeks in, because they have to take you off, as far as I know, they have to take you off of medication while you're going through it.
wow.
So I was unmedicated and I was having my brain shocked 3 times a week. And 3 weeks in, I had a massive psychotic episode, and I had to be hospitalized from that point on. Maybe it wasn't 3 weeks in, maybe it was two. I All of this is from other people telling me what happened because I don't remember it. I don't remember most of that time period because the ECT wiped a lot of my memory. I call them shadow memories. I have kind of weird random bits and pieces of memory from that time period. But a lot of it I've had to have people tell me about. And it took my husband years to talk about it. Like he wouldn't talk about it for about 3 years
Oh
afterwards
my
because it was
goodness.
such a traumatic thing for him to watch his wife go through that he refused to discuss it. And so it took a long time before he was willing to even talk about it.
And
Hmm.
wow, and also I can imagine when, especially when you were unstable, how could you care like for your children, especially, from the time
Yeah.
like they were born? Like, were you able to care for them at all? Or, like, did your husband?
Well, so it's the thing with bipolar disorder is you're not constantly unstable. So
No,
I had
no.
periods of time where I was stable and I was functioning and I was taking care of things. But that's another piece that I added into my emergency response plan is the very first part of that is your emergency response team. It's like your support team. Who are the people you can call on for help? And one of the most important pieces of that is understanding what they're there to, what their purpose is in that team, and then also setting clear boundaries for it, because it's really important for the person who has the disorder to take responsibility for themselves. It's hard,
Yes,
but it's really important because they're ultimately the only person who can. But
exactly.
I had a couple of good friends who loved me and who wanted to help me. And so the times that I struggled the most was when I was depressed.
I see.
I would have a really hard time functioning, and I would get out of bed and I would feed my kids, and then I would lay on the couch and have one arm around each child while they watched TV so that I could sleep, because I wanted to make sure that they were safe. And so if they got up, they would wake me up by pulling my arm off. Um, or like pulling my arm out from around them. Do you understand what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was laying down with one child in each arm. But I found a friend of mine was the one who started it. She realized how depressed I was and how much I was struggling, and she offered to take my kids for a couple hours over to her house to play, to let me sleep. And that was such a huge blessing for me because was overwhelmed with guilt because I felt like I was a bad mom. At that time, that was my thinking, like I'm a bad mother. And so having her, and I didn't ask for help a lot from her, maybe once a week, she would come get my kids and take them to the park or take them, over to her house to play. And it would give me a couple of hours where I could just sleep. And that's one of the things with depression that, it's really important to understand. There's a reason you're tired. It's your body, your brain, especially if you've gone manic and then depressed, your brain was in overdrive for a long time, and it kind of crashes and it needs sleep. It's like being sick. Like when you're sick, you need sleep. When you're depressed, you need sleep, right? But you have to figure out how to make sure that the things that you need to do get done and you still take care of yourself at the same time. And that was a huge blessing for me to have a couple of friends that I could call on and just say, hey, could you help me out for a couple hours and watch my kids so I can take a nap?
Wow.
And so it's really important. The other piece in that, in the like your emergency response team, was setting clear boundaries for my husband, helping him understand what he could do and what he wasn't responsible for. He was not responsible for making me happy. And that was
No.
really important for him to understand. Was it wasn't his responsibility. It wasn't his fault that I was depressed, and it wasn't his responsibility to make me happy. And so helping him understand like what he could do to help, during the times when I was depressed, I would tell him, I'm really struggling right now. I'm doing the best that I can. And he would know I'm not going to be able to keep up with the dishes. I'm not going to be able to keep up, he would
You were
know that
honest.
yeah, he would know the things that he could help out with. But he also, the final piece of the emergency response plan is rebooting your system. So he also knew that I had a plan for getting myself back into a good space. And so that's why that plan was so important. Was before, I felt like a victim. I felt like it was happening to me and I didn't have any control. And so because you feel like a victim, you feel like everybody else just has a suffer because I'm suffering and I can't help it. But the reality is that damages relationships. And
Yes.
so I had to learn how to take responsibility for myself and show that I'm taking responsibility so my husband could see, yes, she's struggling, but she's also doing this to take care of herself. And so then he was willing to partner with me, and he'd say, okay, I will take this off of your plate right now while you're trying to get better. And he would help out knowing that it wasn't going to last forever. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. And so simply put, maybe you can share some good news. When was your last severe manic psychotic episode? Like how long have you, in other words, how long have you been officially stable?
I honestly don't remember the last psychotic episode. I have hypomania
Still?
only when I move. The only thing that I haven't been able to figure out how to stop is hypomania when I move. For whatever reason, moving triggers hypomania in me. And I told my husband actually a couple days or a couple weeks ago, I'm kind of curious to see if I could manage it now, because I've like eliminated most of my triggers with other things, through counseling and stuff. And I don't get hypomanic anymore. And even the depression, anytime I have had some depression, I'm still able to function mostly. And I can usually see a trigger that caused the depression. So I don't have depressive episodes that are caused by a chemical imbalance anymore. They're circumstantial things that trigger them. And then I go work with my therapist and remove the trigger. And so I'm balanced now. Like I don't have manic episodes anymore. I don't have psychosis anymore. And I do a lot of self-care. I'm very careful about my schedule. I'm very careful about my sleep. I take my supplements diligently. And I live a balanced, healthy life. I have a very healthy, normal life. My youngest daughter doesn't really know me as imbalanced. My youngest daughter is 8 years old, and she has never really experienced any serious manic or depression.
Oh wow. And that's at least good. So you
Yeah.
so I understand you still have hypomanic episodes when like your routines change, but
When I
they
move,
when you
like
move
move from one state to another.
one state and
Yeah.
and so when you move you have but they don't last prolonged and they
Well, so the
you get under
hypomania
control.
is, I just get hypomanic, and my hypomania is like I have a hard time sleeping. My brain won't
Yeah.
shut off. Those are the things, and that I don't know why moving triggers that. We've moved 6 times in our marriage, and every single time I got hypomanic during the move, and then I crash afterwards.
But it's
And but knowing that, the thing that's helpful about it though is that knowing that it's going to happen, I plan for it. And so I know I'm going to get hypomanic, when I move, and then afterwards there will be a depression, and I know how to manage the depression so it doesn't get prolonged. So I know how
wow.
to manage it so that I heal from it and I just recover and then I move on with my life.
Wow. Wow. And so at least the hypomania is not severe. You're even planning more now so that it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to move.
Where do you live
I
now?
told my husband, I said, I don't really want to move. I'm just curious. I'm just curious to see like if I could manage it this time.
Where do you
So
live
I don't,
now?
we live in Utah.
Oh, Utah. Oh yeah, I'm in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
we've moved 6 times in our marriage, and I don't want to move anymore. Like I would love
I
just to stay in one spot.
oh
It's not
wow.
that I love Utah, but it's not necessarily because I love Utah. I just don't want to move anymore. Like
I
I'm
I
ready to be settled.
I don't blame you. And could you say your marriage is blissful now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, so for years I kept asking my husband if he'd be willing to go to counseling with me because I knew that there had been serious damage to the relationship, in the time leading up to 2008, especially in 2008. But my husband he really had a hard time with the idea of going to counseling. He's a very private person. He doesn't like opening up to strangers and that. But back in 2001, 2021, he finally came to me and said he was ready. And so we did some marriage counseling and it was really beneficial.
And
And
it's helpful
yeah, we have a very healthy relationship now, and I'm so grateful to him. I'm really grateful that he stuck it out. Like I said, I wouldn't have blamed him if he'd left.
you wouldn't have
It was
blamed
a
him.
really rough, it
And
was really hard.
imagine where your children would have gone if he would have left.
Well, and the other thing that was, well, he probably would have taken them with him.
Yeah,
I
but
don't think he would have left our kids with me at that time.
no.
I was not a healthy person at the time, but that was the other thing that I did was a few years back, I had both of my older children in therapy, just to allow them an opportunity. And I told them both, I think that you have some emotional wounding from your childhood from me. And I want you to talk about it. I want you to talk to your therapist about it. I want you, if you need me to come into a session, I will. But it was really important to me. One of the things that was hard for me when I went through, during therapy and that was feeling disloyal if I needed to talk about somebody that was close to me. And it took time for me to understand that it's not about like blaming the other person or whatever. It's about recognizing there was a wound and healing the wound. And
Right.
so I took my children to therapy and I told them, please talk about your mother. Like talk about the problems that you had from, whatever problems might have come up. I want you to talk about it and don't feel like it's going to hurt my feelings. Don't feel
No,
like it's,
that's good
it was really important for me to apologize to them and also provide them with the opportunity for healing
for
because
healing. Yeah,
even
because
though
it's
I
not
didn't
you.
do it on purpose, I had caused harm to my children.
Absolutely. You did it wasn't you per se. It wasn't intentional. You did cause harm and you need to bind up those wounds.
Right.
And so wow. And but now you're a coach, you help other mothers have bipolar mental illness. That's what you're doing, right? You're an
Yeah.
entrepreneur.
Yeah. I started my blog 2 years ago and I have that emergency response plan that I told you about. I actually came up with a guide to teach other people how to develop that, and it's free on my website. People can go and get that and learn how to proactively manage their mood cycles. And then
Awesome.
next year I'm launching the Upsiders Tribe program that just teaches the method that I use to live a healthy, balanced, productive life with bipolar.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, now Tyler, do you have any questions for our guest? I know you've been silent the majority of the time, so I want to give you the floor.
Hmm. Yeah, why did you have the shock therapy?
I was so severely depressed that they said that was the only way to overcome it. The way that the doctors explained it was that it was like my brain was like a computer that had frozen and it needed to be rebooted. That's the way they described it. And at the time, I was so severely depressed, I almost couldn't think. I had
Oh
been
yeah.
depressed, like severely depressed for months, and it was actually the pastor of our church that told my husband, "You need to hospitalize her. She's had a breakdown, and you need to put her in the hospital." And my husband was about to go out of the country, and so they sent me to another state where my family was with my children and put me in the hospital there. That's why I was hospitalized in multiple states, and that's what the doctors there wanted to do is they wanted to do electroconvulsive therapy. And I didn't, I don't think that I don't, looking back, I don't think that I would have made a different decision knowing what I knew at that time because I didn't know any better. Like I didn't know, I needed help. I was severely depressed. I couldn't function. I had had a major breakdown. And that was what they said was going to help me.
Wow.
Was
Well,
was electrical convulsive therapy, was that to ultimately control epilepsy?
Well, actually, what it's doing is causing a seizure in your brain. So electroconvulsive therapy causes your brain to seize. And I'm not an expert on the theory behind it, but my understanding based on what I was told is that you are trying to reset the brain. You're trying to, it's stuck in a certain state and you're trying to reset it. So they cause your brain to seize. That's why people, somebody who has a seizure will have a lot of times will have memory loss. That's why I lost my memory for all that time. And some of the after effects were really uncomfortable too. Like I couldn't remember my son's birthday for years after that. Like I would have to ask people what my son's birthday was. I would get stuck on my signature halfway through and I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do next. Like I had some really weird, uncomfortable, and it was really hard to have caused all that damage during that time and not remember it. Like I had no memory of what had happened during that
Oh
time, but I
man.
had caused, it's like blacking out and your body is doing all this stuff and you wake up and there's damage all around you and you have no memory of how it happened. That's what it felt like.
So
So
basically the treat that therapy, I guess it can also be used to diagnose epilepsy, is that right? Because another EEG
I don't know.
can,
Yeah, I don't
the
think I don't believe that
electroencephalogram.
it's a diagnostic tool.
Oh,
I
it's
don't
not.
know for sure. So, but I don't believe it's a diagnostic tool. I believe that it's strictly a treatment. I don't know if it's used to treat other things. And I do
Okay.
know that there are some people who say that it worked well. I know Carrie Fisher used it, and she said it
Yeah.
was helpful to her, but it was not a positive experience for me. It was a very
mm,
negative experience for me.
So you were basically having seizures.
Yeah, they were forcing seizures in my brain.
Okay.
wow.
I don't know why you would want to do that though. I mean, it's still kind of interesting to me
Well,
that you would, you know,
I think a lot of the treatment of these disorders, bipolar and that are attempting to treat something that is really hard to understand. You know, I
Yeah.
I've had a lot of
yeah.
people say that there are different, a lot of different people give me different explanations for bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
For me, I'm confident that there's something out of balance in my brain because the micronutrient treatment that I take balanced my brain chemicals. Like it balanced my brain out so that it started functioning in a healthy way. And I have tried going
Yeah.
off of it over the past 12 years and I start having the symptoms again. And so I know that that works for me. And, so I do believe that there is something chemical going on in your brain. But I also know, so I've read that the other thing is I've done a ton of research personally just because I was trying to learn how to live well. And I've read books about severe trauma, and severe trauma can cause the brain chemistry to get altered, and that can cause bipolar disorder. It can cause depression. It can cause anxiety. I know that. So I don't know. I think that
Yeah.
there is a genuine desire, on the part of the medical or of doctors to try and help people. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes I think it's just guessing at what's going to help.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I do believe that emotional trauma can trigger bipolar. It seems like Sailor here, you know.
Tyler.
Well, I will tell you from my personal experience that I was when I was 19 years old. So I was diagnosed at 24, and at 19 years old, I was married. Not my current husband. I was married before, and my husband was abusive,
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
and that triggered the onset. So I have in high school, I can see like now that once I got diagnosed, I could look back at high school and see I had symptoms of bipolar. They just weren't as intense. So when I was younger, I had symptoms, but everybody just thought I was a really emotional kid. But I can go back and I can track it. I know I can track the mood cycles from when I was a teenager. But when I went through the trauma of the abusive marriage, that caused the full onset of the actual illness. And so after that was when I got severely depressed, and then I started getting manic, and I started cycling. And so the trauma triggered the full onset of the disorder, even though there were late, kind of more minor symptoms when I was younger. The trauma itself triggered the onset of the full disorder.
Exactly. Exactly. Hang on. So, can so does any of your family members, do they have bipolar disorder? Because I heard it can be genetic as well.
Yeah, there's I have a sibling who has it, and then I also have, my understanding is my grandmother did. The thing is that my grandmother was in and out of the hospital growing up, but nobody talked about it. People
Wow,
just
no,
talked about grandma was sick, but nobody talked about what she was sick with.
yeah,
And so she had all of I've been told that she had bipolar disorder, but I've never had long discussions because a lot of people in my family don't want to talk about it, which is, I
yeah,
understand. But my grandmother had, like, when she died, she had a whole closet of clothes that she'd purchased that still had the tags on them. She would
yeah,
get manic and go shop,
yeah,
and then she would get depressed and not be able to get out of bed, and so,
yeah,
but nobody talked about it. And because nobody talked about it, nobody recognized the symptoms in me.
yeah,
And that's one of the reasons why I'm so open,
because
is I'm like, this is not something to be ashamed of. This
yeah,
is not a
no,
flaw.
because a lot of people, they don't talk about bipolar and mental health, because I get it, the stigma that's there, because mental illness, it's not a physical wound, it's internal. And of course, other people, since they can't physically see that, they'll think, oh, if someone has mental illness, they're messed up. I mean, they are, but like, it's not their fault. It's not them. Makes sense.
Well, and also if you look at the way that it's portrayed in the media,
Yeah.
the most recent example is Kanye West. He's he's been saying things that seem kind of, a little bit out there and stuff. And so everybody's talking about, well, he's bipolar. And I thought, that is not representative of the entire bipolar community. Like, I don't know if he's been treated. I don't know, I don't know, but that doesn't mean that that's what your life is. You're saying irrational things, or things that are controversial all the time, and then if you look at it in movies, movies want things that seem exciting or
Yeah.
controversial or whatever. And so when they represent somebody has bipolar disorder in the movies, they represent him as somebody, extremely unstable, always toxic, ruining relationships and that. And so we develop this idea that they're a crazy person, that they're toxic, all of these really negative things. And so it makes people not want to get diagnosed, because they don't want to hear. That's why my reaction was the way it was when I got diagnosed, because the only time I'd ever heard of anybody with bipolar disorder were crazy people,
Wow.
and I'm like, I don't want to be crazy. I don't want that to be me.
No, I hear you. So you have 2 children, right?
I have 3. Yeah. I have 4. My oldest is my stepson. And then I've got three children that are my biological children. So
3 daughters?
no, I have a daughter, and she's in college now, and then I have a son and my youngest is a daughter. I got a little caboose.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
you seem to live a very good life. Well, if you don't have anything else, I guess, Tyler, if you don't have any other questions, I don't for now, but what I like to do is, I know you're limited on time, but what I like to do is I ask all my guests on the podcast this question. Anybody who's struggling right now, particularly with bipolar disorder or any mental illness, what advice would you give to them to rise to the top?
Ask for help. Number 1, ask
That's
for
right.
help.
That's right.
I think that's the hardest thing, is that I was so embarrassed for so long, even after I got diagnosed. Like, I felt really ashamed of the symptoms that I had. I felt ashamed of the behaviors. I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment. And so I really still struggled asking for help. And the other thing that I would say is, your life matters.
It does.
You matter, and your life matters, and it will get better.
And
even if it feels hopeless, reach out and ask for help. I started a Facebook group for moms with bipolar disorder, or prospective moms with bipolar disorder, to try and create a community of hope and encouragement. There are people out there that want to help you. Even if you don't have family members that can help, there are people out there that want to help you, because your life matters, and you can live well with your disorder.
And I know for family members watching their loved ones go through it, it's just as overwhelming as is to the person, the people itself who have the illness. And I guess the advice you would give them is just stay strong. And I know it's hard, but your support may save a life, right?
Yeah, and I think that I would encourage if it's a close family member, like a spouse or a sibling or a parent, I would encourage them to seek counseling to help learn how to set healthy boundaries, because it can be really distressing to have somebody suffering that's close to you, and you can put a lot of effort and end up hurting yourself as well, and that doesn't help the person.
You always have to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah.
Well, Tyler, do you have anything else?
Going back to what you said about how it's not internal, the mental illness is not external, rather, excuse me, but internal. Yeah, it's in the brain, but it's still technically like there is something going on chemically within it. And so in a sense, it is physiological in a sense, even though it's internal, even though it's in the brain, but it's still physiological.
I think it's considered less socially acceptable to be mentally ill, though. I think that's one of the hard things is it's harder to grasp. I use the analogy of somebody having diabetes. A doctor helped me with that one time. He said it's like having diabetes, and I know I've heard other people say it's not, but I really believe that it is. Your brain is missing something to function in a healthy way. You have to figure out what your brain needs so that it'll function in a healthy way. And then you have to make lifestyle changes in order to make sure that you take care of yourself. I know people that have type 1 diabetes and they have to take insulin, but they also have to there's lifestyle changes that they had to make. They had to accept responsibility for themselves in order to be able to live healthy with their disorder. And it's the same type of thing.
Yes, it's the same thing.
Well, generally type 1 diabetes has to do with the immune system attacking the pancreas, but type 2 is more or less the lifestyle part.
Well, but my friend I've had a couple of friends who have type 1 diabetes that I interviewed just to understand it better. And there are when I say lifestyle changes, like they have to be very conscientious about what they're eating. They have to be very careful about what they take in, manage. That's what I mean by lifestyle changes. I'm not talking about type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes is something that you could cause in yourself, whereas type 1 diabetes is something that just happens to you. You don't choose to have, you know what I mean? Do you understand?
Yeah, and type 2 diabetes is more or less just insulin resistance in general. But, but it seems like if you develop too much sugar in the brain, it could trigger, that too much sugar can trigger what's called diabetic seizures. It can trigger other things too, bipolar, potentially depression. Like I know it can trigger depression. Too much blood sugar can.
Oh yeah.
So so if you don't live healthy, you could potentially be jeopardizing your mental health.
Yep, exactly.
In fact, you are. So
all right, well, if nothing else, thanks so much for being on Hope Without Sight, giving our viewers hope out there. Give it up for Michelle Reitinger.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. We hope you feel renewed, inspired, and encouraged, like you can just carry on and conquer the world.
Please hit the subscribe button on all platforms and tell your friends and family to do the same.
Blessings to all.